He's not turning down a $44 million player option to take the mid-level with the Lakers. I'm sorry, he's just not.
So let's get into their offseason decisions now, and that starts with Chris Paul. He has a $44.2 million player option that at the start of the year, had you told me he'd be seriously considering turning this thing down, I would have told you you're absolutely crazy. But given how he played this year, given what, bringing them to the finals, Eric Pincus of Bleacher Report reported in June, and I can tell you that he's got another article coming out soon where he's doubling down. He's saying sources around the league expect Chris Paul to turn down that player option. He's looking for somewhere in the 3-year, $100 million range. Chris Mannix of Sports Illustrated, I think this was when Pincus's original report came out, said he was talking to execs around the league. They were pegging his value somewhere around 3 years, $60 million. And if you look at ProfitX has projections for the next 3 years, the 3 years 60 is more in line with what they're projecting. But, the intangibles of Chris Paul are impossible to quantify. And as you said, Booker, I know Ayton in particular throughout the playoffs really just kept emphasizing how important Chris Paul was to his development. So how do you see the Chris Paul negotiations unfolding between him and Phoenix this summer?
Yeah, I mean, for starters, because I'm already seeing the, LeBron and the Lakers are interested in Chris Paul reports floating around. He's not turning down a $44 million player option to take the mid-level with the Lakers. I'm sorry, he's just not. But I do think he will opt out. I don't think he'll consider other teams unless the Suns are lowballing him and he needs, like the Knicks as leverage, because we've seen the Knicks used as leverage so many times. Poor Knicks. But and I got a lot of flack on Twitter this morning for saying this, but if I'm the Suns, I'm giving him a 3-year, $100 million deal if that's what he wants. I think I start with a 2-year, $65 million type offer. But if he's holding out for 3, you give him 3. And if the last year sucks and he's hurt and he's old, then you deal with that as it comes. The whole point of re-signing Chris Paul is not to rest on your laurels. It's to make sure that you find and start grooming his long-term replacement. Because there's no better point guard to learn from, even at this stage in his career, than Chris Paul. So your goal is to find someone. I don't think that player is Campaign. I love Campaign, but I think he's a high-end backup. And I think you just can't let a guy like that walk when you've been in this desert, this playoff drought for 10 years. And it's been absolute garbage these last 10 years. Aside from one season where they won 48 games and just missed the playoffs, it's been awful. And that's all Devin Booker has ever known until the last season or so. So if you let this guy that Devin Booker loves playing with and has spoke glowingly about all season long, if you let him walk out the door and don't have a better replacement, because spoiler alert, there aren't that many options that you can replace Chris Paul with this summer, you're telling your franchise superstar who now expects to compete for championships every year that you're an unserious franchise, that you are not, that you're not committed to the same thing he is. And that is when I start to worry, because Booker has put up with a lot of crap through his first 4 or 5 years, and he's taken the brunt of that as, this guy with the reputation of empty calories and, good stats, bad team player. Now he finally shows that he can win, and you don't do everything in your power to keep that going. I just don't get it. I know that Chris Paul's 36. You're going to be paying him through his age, 38, 39 season, and you're going to be paying him a lot of money, and that could be a problem when Cam Johnson's extension comes around. But you need to do what you can. Robert Sarver has to pay up to keep this team together, because they've only been to the finals 3 times in 53 years as a franchise. They've never won a title, which is the longest title drought in the NBA for any organization. You have to do what you can now to capitalize on what's left of Chris Paul's window, to prove to Devin Booker and the rest of this young core that you're serious. And winning helps with the culture. It helps instill good habits. It helps attract more talent for the future. So I just don't understand the Suns fans that are saying, he faded in the finals, or, we saw that, he always gets hurt in the finals. Who cares? They went to the NBA Finals. They were 2 wins away from winning it all. You know, if they close out the fourth quarter of Game 4, or if they don't have a turnover or that horrible second quarter in Game 5, we're talking about something completely different here. So it really is a game of inches, even in the NBA. And I just think you try to push for a 2-year deal with Chris Paul, but if he pushes for 3 years, 90 mil, 100 mil, you have no leverage in this situation. Like, you're the Phoenix Suns, who were a joke for the better part of the last decade. You do what you can to keep a good thing going.
Yeah, I know. So Pincus's article touches on the Lakers' possibility, this one that's coming, and he does note that the MLE option is just not going to happen. You know, they're either going to have at most they have the $9.5 million non-taxpayer MLE, and that's going to hard cap them, or you have the $5.9 million. No, that's out.
How dare Chris Paul not be interested in the mighty Lakers, right? How dare he?
Doesn't he want to win?
Right.
Yeah. Take a $40 million pay cut. So the other options were they could trade every single player on their roster not named LeBron or AD, and they would only have $21 million in cap space. Or he was suggesting an opt-in and trade, which is how he got from the Clippers to Houston. And that could be, sending some combination of KCP, Kuzma, Talen Horton-Tucker in a sign-and trade, Schroeder in a sign-and trade. I forget who the last one. Oh, Alex Caruso in a sign-and trade. But he also noted, all of these are just so unrealistic because the Suns have to say yes. And are they going to sign off on Chris Paul for Dennis Schroeder and Kyle Kuzma? Probably not.
We should start fining the Lakers when fans begin to get a hold of the trade machine.
Well, Russell Westbrook popped up today. I don't know if you guys saw that.
He did.
I would love that though. Because that would just be fun. Go ahead.
So Pickens does mention the Knicks, as Gerald, you brought him up too, because they have $50 million in cap space, and Leon Rose, the Knicks president, was Chris Paul's former agent. So there are connections there. But I go back to what you said. The Knicks made the playoffs. They're a nice, surprising story. If Chris Paul looks at these two teams in the vacuum and he says, which team gives me the better chance of making the finals? Sure, the Western Conference is tougher than the East, but in the East, we still have to go through Milwaukee next year. We're going to have Brooklyn's going to be there. We'll see what happens with Philly. Atlanta's on the rise. Compared to the West, where, as we said, LeBron's getting older. AD, we can't ever be sure that he's going to be healthy in the final, or once the playoffs roll on. Kawhi is hurt. Jamal Murray's hurt. The Suns might have a better shot just in a vacuum based on the injuries in the landscape than the Knicks, even without regard to the talent on their respective rosters. Then take into account the Suns have a much better roster than the Knicks. I don't see why Chris Paul has any incentive to leave Phoenix, unless, as you said, Robert Sarver says, 3 years, $45 million, take it or leave it. And the Knicks are 3 years, write a blank check. We don't care. $130 million, fine. What's your read on the Chris Paul situation? How do you think that goes down this summer?
I think he stays. Look, he is so competitive. He has been angling for a finals berth for years. Now he got one. He has a team next to him that's only going to get better. He's not attached to a lot of old guys who are going to decline. I mean, he's a smart guy. Surely he recognizes that Devin Booker is going to come back better next year. Deandre Ayton is going to come back better next year. Same goes for Mikhail Bridges, Cam Johnson. If Cameron Payne is retained, him as well. I mean, there's really no reason to look at this Sun squad and say, well, it's a finished product, because it's not. A lot of these guys still have so much more potential left in their tank. So he's a smart guy. He would want to stick around. Of course, like you said, Bryan, if Robert Sarver is going to lowball him, that changes the dynamics. So that would be some variable that we need to take account of. But if everything holds true, that Sarver recognizes the situation that he's in, and he goes, you know what? If it's 3 years, $100 million, fine, let's just go do it. Then I don't see a single scenario that makes sense outside of him, sticking around here. Of course, I would be shocked if he's not a Phoenix Sun by next season.
Same. Yeah. And Sarver has said, to his credit, that he's willing to pay up to keep, I think it was within the last year that he's willing to pay up to field a contender, and that's what he has now. So hopefully he's true to his word on that. But just given the way that Chris Paul has spoke about this team, the way he said he wanted this trade to Phoenix to play with Devin Booker and Monty Williams, just the way he spoke, he's called like Mikhail Bridges like one of his sons. Just the relationship he has with some of these guys, it's like I don't see him leaving that kind of team. He loves these guys. He loves being around this group, and you know that's a cliche to say that kind of thing. Guys always say stuff like that, but it really did feel authentic, especially with a finals run to back it up. So I would also be shocked if he left this summer. Yeah,
and on the Monty note, I mean, I saw that clip going around this morning of Monty going to the Bucks locker room to congratulate them. It's just like that dude, it has to be one of the nicest, classiest guys in the NBA, and like that should matter too. I mean, Chris has a long-standing relationship with Monty Williams, predating his Phoenix days, but you know, I would want to continue playing for that man. He just clearly respects players as human beings, not just as commodities who help him get a ring. So that could be another thing keeping, you know, not only Chris in Phoenix, but helping lure some other outside talent to Phoenix as well. Let's go into the other big decisions for Phoenix. Deandre Ayton, we have to start there, and I think it's probably not going to be a super long conversation because he's eligible for an extension this offseason. I think, especially after this playoff run, he's going to expect a 5-year max deal. Gerald, do you sign that check?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it could reach up to 5 years and I think $168 million, which is what guys like, you know, Cat and Joel Embiid have gotten. Ayton's obviously not on that same caliber of player, but you know, he's earned a max. What he did in his first season at age 22, or his first postseason at age 22, was incredible, and he's only going to get better from here. You know, you mentioned possibly developing a mid-range floater. You know, there's been this idea that he's going to have a 3-point shot, and maybe he will in a couple years. It's not there yet, but he's only going to get better at what he does, and he's already really good at what he does. I mean, I would argue that he's a top 5 center in the NBA, if not just on the cusp of that right now. So I think you pay a max for a guy like that. You don't mess around with that kind of thing, and I think he's earned it. Like he's proven himself as a cornerstone for this franchise for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, and I mean, one of the most admirable things about Ayton, beyond just how well he played throughout the playoffs, is that he's clearly embraced this role. And Morten and I have talked about this, where, you know, he's not trying to have the entire offense run through him. Like, he gets it that, you know, it's running through Chris and Devin. He's just got to set good screens, roll to the rim. Like, he's not trying to have 50 post-ups per game. He's not getting frustrated and checking out defensively if he, you know, doesn't go and touch the ball for most of a quarter. So I think, you know, if you're trying to build on that type of team-first culture, Deandre Ayton seems like the perfect guy to keep in your organization. And he just, I mean, you know, based on just kind of the clips from post-game press conferences that I've seen, he just seems like a genuinely great dude.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right about his mentality, because that's huge for the Suns, because on a team with Booker and Chris Paul, you need a guy that's willing to kind of take that back seat offensively and focus on the things that he's really good at, which is setting strong screens, rolling hard, finishing around the basket at an elite level, and just being the defensive anchor. And he did all of those things during this postseason run. So it's rare for a #1 pick to have that kind of mindset, but he does. He just wants to be better and he wants to win. So as long as that continues to remain the same, you know, there's always the disease of more as teams get better. So maybe that it'll get to that point one day, but right now he's just a young kid that wants to win and wants to compete. So he's got that right mentality for that.
Yeah.
I will say something that I think we need to take into account, because I agree. I think a couple months ago, well, a little bit longer back, I was a little bit more skeptical about maxing out DeAndre Ayton. I wasn't really sure that was the right approach. that is dead and buried. I think he's a max guy, but I do think you need a plan with him moving forward. I think he is too talented offensively to just play this sort of spot role. And I understand what he did this year was for the betterment of the team, and that worked. That's great. But I do still think he needs to receive the opportunity to establish himself more offensively. I mean, we saw him in year 2 average 18 a game, and yes, he was force-fed a lot. That shouldn't come into play. But I want to make sure that if he's paid, you know, what is that per year? The max, like 34 million per year, something along those lines. I would want to at some point pretty soon to see the offensive production go up a little bit, and that's not me putting that on his shoulders. That is me as an NBA organization recognizing that as Chris is going to get older, as Jay Crowder is going to get older, you know, it's necessary that we balance things out offensively and defensively. And he is just such a big guy who's got such a great touch around the basket that it makes sense. I mean, for crying out loud, this guy was compared to David Robinson coming in to the NBA draft. So I think it's just so important that we don't get lost in the whole, oh, he's this role player superstar in a way. He is a featured star. He should get those touches. This isn't me going, hey, remember Andre Wiggins who promised he'd get better? That's not that's not the route. I'm not gonna sit Ayton down and ask him if he wants to get better, because I think he is getting better. It is looking internally. It's looking in the mirror and going, we need to make sure that we have a plan for this. That is all that I need to be aware of, and then I hand him the max contract, no questions asked.
Yeah. Mikhail Bridges is the other big name up for an extension this summer. I definitely don't think he's a no-brainer max guy. I don't think he's going to get the max just based on what we've seen from similar 3-and-D types, OG Anunoby in particular. So, Gerald, what would you be comfortable offering Mikhail in an extension this summer? Do you think the Suns can get it done? Or, I mean, you know, if they do re-sign Chris and, you know, sign Deandre to a max, all of a sudden you've got 3 guys probably taking up $100+ million in cap space. You know, do they start to get nervous if you add a big deal for Mikhail on the books? And maybe do they wait and let this thing play out in restricted free agency instead?
I think you extend both Ayton and Bridges this summer. I think OG Anunoby set the market very well for a guy like Mikhail Bridges. Like, he got 4 years and 72 mil, I think. I mean, I would probably be comfortable paying Bridges like 4 years and 100 mil, honestly. And that's, maybe I'm higher, but I feel like the development he's going to make on the offensive end, coupled with just how much better he's going to get defensively, and he's already fantastic on that end. He's going to be a very important two-way player. He's kind of the glue that holds them together on both ends a little bit. So, and I think his offensive role will increase just like Ayton's, especially as the Suns try to ease Chris Paul's load if they re-sign him over these next couple seasons. So, yeah, I think a 4-year, 100 mil deal isn't out of the question. I would probably aim for like 4 and 80. But if you have to go as high as 100 mil to keep a player like that around, then you kind of do it. And that's one of the things Suns fans get so nervous about, these kind of conversations, like, oh, we're going to be paying all these guys all this money. Like, you're not going to be paying him anything. This is literally just on Sarver right now.
Right.
Like, you'll have to worry about Cam Johnson and taking care of him down the line, and maybe that gets dicey depending on what you give Chris Paul. But, like, in the here and now, you need to keep core players around, and you will figure the rest of it out as you cross those bridges. Like, for now, take care of the bridges in front of you.
I was wondering if that was a pun. Yeah,
I was too.
This is why I'm single.
I mean, I will point out that if they sign Ayton and Bridges 2 extensions, they won't kick in until the 22-23 season. So next year, they're not going to have to worry about the luxury tax either way. It's really at 22-23 seasons the first time where things could really, you know, push into tax territory and we start to have those conversations. But more, how would you handle Bridges negotiation this summer? Is 4 years, 80 to 100 seem about right to you?
It does, but I want to have a conversation with Bridges and his team and more or less gauge where they're at. Like, are they just so hell-bent on getting an extension in place? Or would they be interested in actually saying, okay, we'll wait it out for restricted free agency in some capacity, believing they can get a better market, because the more data you have to work with, the better. But of course, if he does reach restricted free agency, there are going to be teams out there that are basically going to look at that as an opportunity and go, hey, look, we can potentially break up a very good finals team right here because we can max him out. And maybe Robert Sarver will say that's just too rich for my blood. So yeah, if you can lock him for 80, the 100 million it's a tough one. Like, I feel that's a little bit too much, but at the same time, I also fully recognize that he plays this vital role, which matters. I also fully recognize that he's only 24. He's going to be 25 next month. So if you lock him up as the extension kicks in, you're getting him in the physical prime of his career as well. So there are certain benefits. I think I'm just a little bit more squeamish after that one year of increased offensive productivity. I'm asking myself, is that a big enough sample size for me to feel comfortable with it moving forward? But ultimately, yeah, I mean, I don't think he can go wrong. Like, the baseline for him is pretty high. The question is, what's his ceiling? That's the big thing. But if he just tops out at what he is, then he's, what, the best two-way perimeter guy on the team? I'll buy that.
And I mean, I think that's the... Because you brought up a good point there, because, you know, we were saying, I feel like, very similar things about a guy like Gary Harris just a few years ago. And obviously the injury thing was the biggest factor for him. But that extension, everybody pretty much unanimously praised it at the time, even though it was a pretty hefty extension, because, the trajectory on both ends of the floor was just nowhere but up. So, I mean, Mikhail Bridges hasn't missed a game, I don't think, in his first 3 seasons due to injury. But yeah, I mean, I think you definitely start off with 480 and leave it at that. And if they push for higher, then maybe I'm more willing to go a little bit higher, just based on my faith in his offensive growth and what we're going to see on that front. But, you know, I feel like 4 years 80 is a pretty good place for the market to be set based on what OG got last year and what the market looks like right now.
Agreed. And also, defensive players are just routinely undervalued. I mean, that's something we saw back when John Hollinger was in Memphis. Like, he looked around and realized, okay, look, we can actually get defensive-oriented players for a penny on the dollar. And, like, OG Anunoby, you could even argue, is underpaid, considering his defensive versatility. He can guard 4 positions. He's a tremendous three-point shooter. Like, if he hit the open market right now, one team out there at the very least would max him, and I have to assume someone would do the same with Mikhail Bridges. So yeah, I guess I'm painting myself into a corner here, and then basically saying if he is offered 80 million over 4 years, you know what? Go ahead, take it. If it's 100, take it, as long as it's not a max. I think that's gonna probably serve the Phoenix Suns best in the long run.
Yeah, like Jalen Brown got 4 years, 115 from Boston, right?
And that was before he broke out.
Yeah, right. And I think that's probably too high for Mikal. But if you end up getting him, like, I agree, 4 years, 100, I'm not thrilled about it, but I still do it because, as you said, like, he plays a position that is just so rare in the NBA. This two-way wing where you can really, you know, elite defensively already, and you can see there's room for growth offensively, but he's a great three-point shooter, if nothing else. Like, that guy's going to stick in the NBA. There is no bust risk with Mikal Bridges at this point. So some team will come with an absurd offer next summer if you don't get him down now.
Yeah.
So the only other guy that the big other big guy, I should say, not only other one, with all due respect to Frank Kaminsky, of course, Cameron Payne, out of the league 2 years ago, and then playing an integral role on a finals team this year. They have his early bird rights, I believe, since they signed him last year. So he's been under contract for technically 2 seasons now, which means it's a similar situation with Reggie Jackson, with the Clippers and Reggie Jackson, where they can offer, it's like $10.1 million is the starting salary. So, a 4-year deal is a little bit north of $40 million. Gerald, what do you think is a fair price for bringing back Payne, and how, given all of these other big salaries that we're talking about, how important is it for the Suns to bring him back next year?
I think it's very important, just because, especially with Chris Paul getting up there in age, especially if you're looking at this postseason run and saying, okay, Chris Paul got dinged up a couple of times, we want to save him a little bit more during the regular season than we did this year, which was our first year together. We want these guys out there as often as possible. Now we have the chemistry. Now we have the system. We have familiarity there. We want to kind of dial back Chris Paul's minutes. You need a high-end backup to, help alleviate some of that burden. Cam Payne, we saw in the finals that he is not the best at running an NBA offense, but he can score. He can score. He gets downhill. He drives. The Bucks did a really good job of baiting him into a lot of drives, and they had the length to, attack some of those layups and swat those away. But throughout the playoffs, he was really good at just coming in, providing energy. He was a very good pull-up three-point shooter and just three-point shooter in general this season. So I think it is important to bring him back. I was saying earlier in the year when he was kind of breaking out, 3 years, 27 to 30 mil for him would make sense. And I feel like that's probably true still now. I think he might have lost himself a little bit extra money that he might have made if he had a really strong finals performance. But, just looking at the whole meat of this playoff run, he was really good and he was really important for their bench unit. So I think especially as you're trying to ease Chris Paul's minutes and his load a little bit, you need to bring a guy like Cam Payne back, especially because, the backup point guard market, I don't know how many guys you're going to find that are going to be able to do what Cam Payne does as immediately for this team, especially.
Yeah. Yeah, I was looking up, what are the high-end backup point guards in the league making? I'm thinking Monte Morris, D'Anthony Melton, all of those guys are right around $8-9 million a year. Tyus Jones was the same. So I think they will be able, if he's interested, being able to offer his starting salary of $10.1 million. I think that's the right range. It's really, what does Cam Payne see for himself? Does he think he could be a starter on a good team? Because if they re-sign Chris Paul, he's not going to have that opportunity in Phoenix, at least for the next few years. So, does he look, maybe a Bulls reunion is in order, or, the Knicks always need a point guard. Does he look at a team that offers him more of an opportunity for playing time, or does he prioritize coming back to, a team that is at least might offer him less money and less minutes, but a better chance at actually winning a ring?
Yeah. Well, he hasn't had the big payout, right? He's earned around $12 million, which for us is definitely a big payout, but in NBA context, that's not a whole lot, especially after you hit your mid-20s. So I would be surprised if someone out there offered him $16 million and he declined that to return to Phoenix for $8 or $9 million. Mm-hmm. I think that's probably where he just decides, you know what, I got to take care of myself and I got to take care of my family. I got to take care of everything. In which case, you can never blame someone for doing that, by the way. But if those offers are mostly the same, 8 to 9 million, I see absolutely no reason why he would leave Phoenix.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And I think just like we were talking about with Chris Paul, the Monty connection is important there because they have that history with the Thunder, and Monty was in on that call when he kind of got called out of the blue. He wasn't in the NBA, and they called him to pick him up for the bubble squad. And he was thrilled to be able to play for a coach that was familiar with him and actually trusted him to give him minutes in that bubble. And he played great in the bubble, and that was kind of the start of this whole relationship. So I think if the offers are similar, unless some team is offering a lot more money or a starting job, I would also be surprised if Cam Payne left kind of the only team in the NBA where he's really found traction so far in his career, and the only coach that's given him that same kind of shot.
That's a good point. I mean, he's never played more than 77 games for any franchise. So essentially, he's never played a full season for anyone, which means the loyalty factor right now, because of the finals run, is probably at the highest with the Suns.
Yeah.
Yeah, it feels similar to what the Clippers are dealing with Reggie Jackson, where he might have some bigger offers elsewhere. I think, in a vacuum, Reggie Jackson might get paid more than Cam Payne, but again, I don't think like a $18 million a year offer is coming for either one of these guys. But I think both of them have found such comfort in their respective roles on their respective teams that they genuinely might take a little bit less. I mean, Jackson, because he did have one big contract already, I think has even more incentive to stay with the Clippers. But yeah, I don't think that $15-16 million a year offer is coming for Cam Payne. So was he going to take $12 million a year instead of 10, if that's what it comes? Like, again, if Phoenix lowballs him and says, we're handing out all these other big contracts and we can only sign you to $4 million a year, and someone's offering 12, they'll probably do it. But if they can, given that they can go up to 10.1, they have the opportunity to re-sign them if they want, I think.
Right. But one note, though, the point guard market in the NBA is shrinking. So that could affect, the offers out there. Maybe some team basically says, we see the writing on the wall. There aren't really a whole lot of point guards available. And it doesn't project like that position is going to get loaded at least for a couple more years. So maybe we just got to roll the dice and sign someone like Cam Payne to $15-16 million a year. In which case, bye-bye Phoenix.
Yeah.